order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The third item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion? Motion by Commissioner Carabelli, support by Commissioner Kraft. Any discussion? Please vote on your tablet. We good? The agenda is unanimously adopted. Item number 4 is approval of the April 12th, 2017 minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Carabelli, supported by Commissioner Romano. Any discussion on the April 12th minutes? Please vote on your tablet. And the minutes are unanimously approved. Item number 5 is public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Please come up and give us your name, and you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Donald Leitwater. I just wanted to share with you, Commissioners, that I haven't had an opportunity to. There's a button right there. Just push right in front of the microphone, right at the base of it, right at the base. Okay. Sorry. Once again, I'd like to introduce myself, Dr. Don Amboyer. I haven't met some of the commissioners, and I'd like to give a little background, if I could, relative to one of the agenda topics today. I had the privilege of being recruited by Chief Justice Denoweth back in 1972 to come to Macomb County following the Attica riot to serve as an administrator at the Macomb County Jail to implement new programs. So consequently, in 1973, I came and was the first probation officer to implement a volunteer probation program where we recruited over 500 citizens to work in conjunction with people who were incarcerated or recently released from the Macomb County Jail. In 1973, I was privileged to be nominated by, at that time, Sheriff Olmsted to serve as administrator in the opening of a new Macomb County Jail Rehabilitation Center, which was just opened, and have input relative to the programming. At that time, we implemented a high school completion program in partnership with L'Anse Creuse Community Schools. We implemented a work release program, substance abuse programs, and in conjunction with Ed Bonnier at the time and John Beerbussy, a variety of community programs who were implemented in the jail. I had the privilege of serving under Bill Hackle for the next 20 years as the first Macomb County Jail Administrator to implement a variety of other programs, and also to participate in the design and construction of the additions to the Macomb County Jail. Consequently, I've had some experience in working in that facility and had the privilege of working with the staff. So there's some insights that I have relative to that. In addition to that, after another career at Macomb Community College, I do teach undergraduate and graduate courses in penology, criminology, and criminal justice at local universities. And I'm also serving as a consultant for the U.S. Department of Justice and a $2.5 million grant with the City of Detroit and the Michigan Department of Corrections for a reentry program for persons being released from state prisons back into the Detroit metropolitan area. Although I haven't been asked or participated in the current study, I would like you to know that I am available. I would like to help in any way that I could to assist Sheriff Wickersham, his staff, and the county to ensure any further success of the programs that are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amboyer. Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the committee? We'll close public participation and move to item number 6, which is the presentations. 6A is the court's overview. Judge Burnett was supposed to be here. Is somebody here on his behalf? Judge Switalski.
Chair Toko, Commissioners, wonderful to see all of you. The chief would have been here. He's at a judicial seminar in Bay City. He's a machine. He never stops learning. He's out there trying to improve himself. In terms of an overview of the courts, and for some of the new commissioners, I believe. For the circuit court, we are separated into two divisions, the civil and criminal division, and then the family division. Within the family division, you're talking about divorce, custody, paternity, child support, adoptions, and then you have the juvenile wing of that. Delinquency, abuse and neglect, all right, termination of parental rights, those type of issues, all right. Juvenile used to be under the probate court, going back many years. In the late 90s, when they implemented the family division, juvenile got put under the circuit court's wing, all right. In addition, the circuit court, the county is responsible for two of our district courts, the 42nd District Courts in New Baltimore and Romeo. All right, that comes within this budget. We're available for any questions. We are trying to be progressive in all ways with the technology, with e-filing. I know you have a big item later up today involving the jail study. We've always gone back to our jail bed allocation agreement. We try to work as well as possible to help manage the jail population. And we're available for any questions. We have the department heads from front of the court, from juvenile, from probate, here to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Judge Switalski? Seeing none, is there a motion to receive and file? Moved by Commissioner Carabelli, supported by Commissioner Lucido. Please cast your vote on your tablet. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Would you want him to stay? Item 6B is the Jail Needs Analysis and Criminal Justice Assessment Report. Sheriff Wickersham.
Well, good afternoon, Commissioners. Just to start out, this whole process began back in January of 2014, when we knew we had some issues at the jail. We had some overcrowding that was occurring, and our staff came together and we put together some programs and put together a committee to go on out and bring in a consulting firm, an outside consulting firm, to really go through the Macomb County Jail, go through the criminal justice system, and give us good data, good recommendations that would act as a blueprint to where we're going to go with care and custody of prisoners into the future for the next 20, 25 years. We entered into a contract with Voorhis Robertson Justice Services, LLC. Here today is Jim Robertson from the company. He'll be doing a presentation shortly. Also involved in this process were consultants David Bennett and Donna Latin. They met monthly with key stakeholders in the criminal justice system to get an understanding of how we operate and what effects the criminal justice system has on inmates at the Macomb County Jail and the population at the Macomb County Jail. Summary of services that were to be provided was an analyze existing documents and information, data analysis practices, hold a symposium with all the key stakeholders, which was done, develop a criminal justice master plan, build consensus amongst criminal justice agencies and the courts, and provide us some recommendations. So I think you all should have received a copy of the report, either electronically or a hard copy. There's a lot of information in there. Obviously, we've seen there's a lot of information and a lot of recommendations. Again, Jim will talk about those recommendations, but I think we have a good blueprint platform of where we would need to go into the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Jim Robertson to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thanks, Sheriff. My name is Jim Robertson, as Sheriff said. Good afternoon to all of you, and thanks for the opportunity to come before you for a little bit this afternoon and speak regarding the report. I was trying to think the other day how long I've been in this business, and let me just give you a little bit of introduction about myself. In 1972, I started as a correctional officer in a county jail outside of Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. Spent 12 years with that county, another 4 years with a neighboring county, and then 2 years with the Justice Department, managing a national training program. And in 1990, formed this company, and since then have been doing consulting work with counties around the country. To date, we have probably provided services in over 44 states at a variety of levels over the course of that time. I only offer that to give you a perspective of the history of myself, that I come from government, having spent a fair amount of my career in that service. So I bring a little bit of a different perspective sometimes to planning. We were contracted to provide a variety of services for the county. We had a team that came in that focused on judicial aspects of it, law enforcement aspects of it, the jail aspect of the project. I'm the person that's here today, but when we had the symposium back in the fall, that day-long seminar, the whole team was there in place and provided a much more in-depth overview of the report and the data findings to date. My presentation today is going to be a smaller one, and I'm going to focus on a couple key points out of that report. I want to focus on jail capacity forecast, what the future might look like for Macomb County. I want to talk about a series of key recommendations that we see as the next step forward for Macomb County. If you had to adopt 2 of the 12 recommendations, 11 or 12 recommendations, what are the ones that we think you should focus on as you go forward? I want to spend a fair amount of time to talk about central intake and assessment, what that means to the county, what that looks like, what's our opinion of that. I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about design options. As we go forward, there's both a policy component to our recommendations and a capital component, space and staff. I want to go to the next steps recommendation. The sheriff's going to come back up. He's going to take that piece of it, and then we'll have questions and answer. Wakely and Associates will be joining me at a certain part in this presentation to provide an overview of some of the work that they have done on the project. So let's talk about what the future might look like for Macomb County. One of the difficulties in a project like this is trying to predict 100% what the future might look like. Why is that? Because policies and practices drive a lot of the impacts on the criminal justice system. They drive capacity, they drive budgets, they drive the aspects of law enforcement and the courts. And so unless you have a true crystal ball and you can predict what the future is going to be 100%, it is hard to come up with the exact estimate. But we take a process where we begin to formulate what could be the future for Macomb County. And so when we began to look at jail capacity for the county, we developed 9 different projection scenarios based on a variety of factors. Those factors were the admissions rate. How many folks are coming into the system? How long are they staying? There are 2 things that drive capacity at the jail: the number of folks who come and the amount of time that they are there. It's the same with the hotel industry, how long people occupy rooms and how many rooms are available, what the service is. It's a different type of a hotel, but it's the same concept that we use for determining the capacity. We looked at county population. Are you going to grow? Are you going to stay stagnant? We looked at what are called peaking and classification factors. The jail operates on an average daily population. Well, the definition of average means it's a midpoint. So at some point you're above that, and at some point you're below it. We began to look at those extremes on the high side to begin to plan for those to take into account what that capacity change might be. So we looked at those 5 items. There we go. Of those 9 different scenarios that we focused on, we chose the low, there were 3 boxes. We chose the low admissions rate and the 20-day average length of stay. We had an average length of stay of 18 days, 20 days, and 22 days. We took that midpoint, but we took the low end of the admissions of that midpoint. That projection scenario said that by the year 2040, the county could anticipate the need for 1,693 beds at the jail. That number is based on something that is critical, which is the implementation of the central intake and assessment process and the implementation of a full-service pretrial services program. Absent those 2 variables, then the projection scenario that was offered was 2,457 beds for the same time period. So we're offering a recommendation that says, if you do nothing and the county continues to grow, admissions continue as usual, in 2040, you could need 750 more beds, and if you implement some changes at this phase and begin to manage the jail population. In our report, we had 11 different recommendations. There's a couple that were grouped together, but there were 11 key recommendations. We've identified what we consider to be the top 2 for implementation now. Every time we have done a project of this magnitude, and we applaud the county for undertaking this level of analysis, because in many cases, agencies had to open up their doors. They had to expose their policies and practices to us, and that can be an intimidating process. But to an agency, we received great deals of information and a willingness to participate in the project. But we recognize that the county cannot and should not implement all 11 recommendations at once. It's way too much to manage. So we've prioritized what we feel are the top 2 that have the greatest impact right now on your system. And those are to create the centralized intake and processing center and to fund a full-service pretrial services program. And so let me talk about those 2 recommendations for a bit. What is central intake and assessment? In a nutshell, I tried to put together 4 descriptive sentences that describe what that facility or process is. It's a centralized campus where all arrestees are booked and processed. Right now you have a system where at your outlying police stations, depending on the township or the jurisdiction, everybody's arrested, processed there, and then brought to the jail at a certain point. This takes a different approach where it says everybody that gets arrested comes to this place first. Now there's a recognition that there's a lot of logistics that need to be worked out. Some agencies have a very high volume of activity. Warren does, extremely high volume. Other places have a lower volume. So how do you work through all of that logistic of officers off the street, bringing somebody here? What does that mean? Not a huge hurdle to overcome, but it takes some analysis and some implementation. But it is this central place where everybody comes. And at the beginning, we have a process to determine the public safety and personal risk of that individual at the beginning. We're not waiting till they've been in custody 3 days, 4 days, a week. We're doing an assessment right at the beginning to determine should they stay in custody, should they be diverted to some other program or service, or should they stay in jail and go into a certain type of program and service there. It is also a facility that provides the appropriate housing space to manage those risks of that individual. Your facility is a full-service jail. It takes everybody in and has to manage the full range of human behavior. The mentally ill, drug abuse, substance abuse, misdemeanor offenders, felony offenders, high risk, low risk. Everybody comes into custody. The young, the old, the male, the female. So the jail needs to have the appropriate space to house and manage all of those behaviors and all of those individuals. That is part of central intake and assessment. Your facility, your current facility, as was outlined in our report, has deficiencies for trying to manage human behavior and inmate behavior today. Your mental health areas, some of your other programs and services areas are lacking. Our recommendation is to begin to improve those along with the central booking and assessment. But it's also a facility that is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to respond to those admissions that come in. The jail is much different than a prison. It can't control when somebody shows up at their door. Everybody gets let in. And so this part of the process has to be staffed and funded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What are some of the goals of central intake and assessment? Well, that first one is to provide that comprehensive universal screening of everybody that comes into the door right at the beginning of the process, so that we know what their risk level is, so that we can manage that risk level and house them appropriately or divert them appropriately. The companion to that is to increase public safety. How do we increase public safety? By keeping those in custody who cause the greatest concern for us from a public risk standpoint, and diverting out and managing differently those that provide the lower risk for the public. So we're making the best use of the available beds that we have. It's to ensure the proper placement, whether it's in custody or out of custody, based on the risk level of that individual. To provide informed, comprehensive release decisions. So it's not just whether or not the person can afford to make bond. It's what is their risk to themselves and to the community. And to start this behavior-based inmate management process early on, so that individuals are not managed based solely on a charge, but managed based on a comprehensive set of variables, companion to their current inmate classification system. So those are the goals of central intake and assessment. What does that process look like? Well, there's an arrest that occurs right at the beginning. Someone is then transported, one way or the other, to the central intake and assessment center. There's a booking process that occurs. They're processed into the system. There's an arraignment that occurs at some point. There's an evaluation and assessment of that individual. There's a decision made about housing, release, what level of supervision they need to be on. And there's a decision made about reentry as they're beginning to transition back into the community. So it's full service. You start the process by coming through this central intake and assessment, and as you're exiting the system, you're exiting out of this process. What are some of the implementation requirements? This is not something that can happen just at the flick of a switch. There are a number of things that have to be resolved and worked through as you go through the implementation process. Transportation is one of the keys. I interviewed every law enforcement agency in the county, had lengthy conversations with the folks who run those agencies. In some cases, the police chief said, start it tomorrow and we will bring you our individuals. We will be happy to give them to you right at the beginning. Other agencies said, we see the value in doing this, but I can't take an officer off the street to transport them all the way up to Mount Clemens and have that person off the street and not managing public safety from a law enforcement standpoint. So I have a transportation concern. So we have to work through what that issue is in terms of how someone gets here. I don't see that as a major stumbling block. I see it as one that for the most part, every agency was more than willing to participate in this process, almost to a key. The location, a lot of conversations about where should it be located. We feel that the location is best served here where you already have a lot of the other services, but there were conversations about satellite locations. And should we have a smaller one of these down in the south part of the county and the main one here? We feel that it's best served right now to evaluate placing it here in Mount Clemens. How you handle arraignments. Part of our recommendations in our report was a centralized arraignment process. We see that as a major topic that needs extensive conversation as a part of this process. We recognize that that is not something that is necessarily easy to implement, but it's key to this central booking and assessment is to resolve how arraignments are going to occur, because they tie into admissions and how folks come into the central intake and assessment process. Certainly space and staffing are key to this process. You don't have enough space in your current facility to start this process. There's more staff, as you'll see later on in the presentation, that need to be a part of this process, and so space is limited. And certainly design, how that space is going to look is one of the next steps for this process. So that's central intake and assessment. But the companion recommendation that we have to manage that population, to stay within that 1,700 bed range, is full service pretrial services. Why is that a key to that component? This is the group that is going to be the engine behind central intake and assessment. Providing space is one thing, but providing the staff and the ability for changes to be implemented and to manage inmate behavior is key. Pretrial services, we think, is the best place for that. It's central to system efficiency, to gathering information and data, providing it to the courts, providing it to others, making the system work as efficiently as possible. It provides universal screening for everybody that comes in the door. Pretrial services will work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in this central intake and assessment process. Everybody gets screened, their risk level is evaluated using a screening tool. Their indigency is evaluated based on this screening tool, and we're figuring out the best approach for that individual as we go forward. It's looking for those that can be diverted. It's trying to figure out how to resolve the holds that have been placed on individuals. In our report, we identified that the data has demonstrated that there's a lot of individuals that have holds from other jurisdictions on them in the system. And this is the group that can help resolve those holds and speed up that decision-making process earlier. The key to the success of pretrial services is a risk-based assessment tool. We're evaluating the individual's risk of flight. We're evaluating the individual's risk to themselves. Are they going to show up in court? And so we administer a tool that is validated, that gives us the best information so that we can determine where to place that individual. And this is the key to jail population management. Those that need to be in custody are here, and those that can perform okay in the community under some form of supervision are in the other bucket. Staffing is one part of this process, but capital improvements to your current campus is a key part of this recommendation. Your facilities that are over there now have evolved over time with a variety of capital improvements projects. It's amazing to see what has occurred on that campus over time, and you are continuing to spend resources to manage those buildings. That's not uncommon. They need to be managed as you go forward. But we saw an opportunity to improve that campus with central intake and assessment and some of these other programs to provide the right type of bed that is needed through renovation and the addition of a small number of beds, as well as making some improvements to that campus. Your current rated design capacity is 1,438 beds. We're recommending a rated design capacity of 1,712 going to the year 2040. That's different than that 1,643 or 1,693 number I gave earlier. The reason that number is different, as we began to put together what some of those spaces might look like, there was an efficiency in the size of the housing units. It didn't affect the number of staff that are required. It's just how things began to come together, so that number was bumped up to 1,712. It's the addition of 274 beds to that campus. It's the replacement and/or renovation of 598 beds, and it's continuing to use the 840 beds in the existing tower. So it's a combination of a variety of current buildings, renovated structures, and new housing units. It also includes the updating and/or improvement of various support services aspects, but also medical services, which ties into the mental health component. So one of the things we did with that capital plan is we put together what is called a very quick adjacency diagram of how the various components of this might come together. And it's going to lead into Wakeley & Associates coming up after this slide. But we began to try to figure out how do things fit together. If we're implementing changes in policies and practices, what does it mean on the capital side and on that campus on Elizabeth Avenue? Well, there's a relationship to the existing towers, and there's a renovation component that goes with the existing towers, which is your current lobby and other services. You'll see the top green box at the top, which is the new intake and assessment center, a relationship to support services, a relationship to new and/or renovated housing units, some additional programming space to support central booking and assessment, renovating the jail annex, and having a new public lobby. So that's how we began to see the capital side of this project coming together. I'm going to ask Dominic to come up and take you through a few more slides, and then I'm going to come back up and talk about staffing for a moment, and then we'll close with the sheriff.
Hi, I'm Dominic Abbott, architect with Wakeley Associates. This is Ron Syme, also an architect with Wakeley Associates. We took this adjacency diagram. Oops. If we could get it off the screen.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Okay, we took the one more. Yeah, okay. Took the adjacency diagram and we tried to come up with a concept, merely a concept. We started with the campus, and part of any project would be a master plan that would make an efficient use of the existing campus. Since it is only a study or a concept, a concept based on this, there's a lot of loose ends, and we have the slides to show how it would have to be phased with the different components, because there's a lot of work there, and there are a lot of people that have to be moved around.
You can't do everything at once. It has to, various components have to go at certain times, or you lose all efficiency here.
Okay. I'll let Ron take you through the components of the project.
To start out the project, to build a new tower and add the additional beds and implement Jim's program, we looked at, and just give you a little history of the jail. On the far left-hand side is the jail annex. That was built in 97, 98. The long rectangular right to the right of that is maximum security. That was built that was the second phase of the jail. That was built sometime, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s. To the right of that, where it says open rec yard, you see an L-shaped figure. That was the original jail. That dates back to the early 50s, and to the right of that, where you see kind of a robot-looking building, that's the rehab area, and directly below that is the jail tower. To add the new beds, we looked at creating efficiency with the existing tower. So we looked at, can we tear down the rehab area that was built in the late 70s? It's very inefficient, and build a new tower at that area. In order to do that, we went back and revisited the jail annex. When we designed the jail annex back in the late 90s, we designed in such a manner we could add another floor in the future. So we looked at moving some of the beds over there. There's 104 beds right now in the rehab center. So we looked at creating additional beds in the jail annex to relieve some of that as we go to decommission that part of the building. Also in the basement of that building is the vehicle repair area. So another component, or the first component, is relocating that off-site to another location so they can repair the vehicles and start the process of creating a new tower. So you see the new tower going up at where the jail annex, or where the rehab area was. So that would be part of the first and second components. The third component would be decommission maximum security, which is that area right there. Tear that down, move those people into the newly completed tower, and or reclassify them to the second floor of the annex. And in this component, we build a new kitchen. The old kitchen stays in place right now. We build a new kitchen and start getting areas set up for the new central intake. The fourth component, we create the central intake, new mental health ward. They come in through the central intake, they're evaluated, put in the right housing units, so forth, so on. And then component 5 is a new entrance for the jail, which would be down where booking is right now. These components go together and kind of implement Jim's plan there, and we create the 1,700 beds. Hopefully this made sense to everyone. Is there any questions? Oh, okay. I'll turn it back over to Jim at this point.
The slide you see before you is a summary of the capital side of it. It shows the 5 different components that go forward. We don't have a cost for that at this phase of the project. It's early on. That would be a next part that would happen. But what we do have is staffing numbers. I felt it incumbent with our project that you have some sense of what could be the increase in staff for the 2 recommendations that we're providing. Why do I offer that? Staffing is ongoing cost to the county. Capital costs are typically one time. They have a life expectancy. Ongoing maintenance and operations obviously is different, but staffing costs live on forever and is the biggest part of any project of this type. How did we arrive at some staffing numbers this early on? We didn't do it in a vacuum. I did it with the representatives of the sheriff's office that are here today. It was a collaborative approach to come up with the number of corrections deputies and pretrial services staff that would be needed to implement those 2 recommendations. At full build-out, 1,712, I think, was the number. 29 additional correctional deputies will be required at full build-out. It's not uncommon to see parts of a building be constructed, but maybe they aren't occupied based on load, or as you get further into the project, you recognize that I can build to a different capacity, plan for one, but at full capacity, 29 additional correctional deputies will be required. We arrived at that number at maximum capacity with that adjacency diagram that I showed you earlier, as well as some more detailed diagrams that we had created. But it's utilizing your current shift relief factor of 1.4 that is used to calculate the number of staff. As a side note, my experience since whenever I started in the business, I've never seen a shift relief factor that low that didn't have something missing. Our project wasn't to evaluate whether it was the right shift relief factor. That shift relief factor is a number that you use to calculate how many staff you need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People have days off, they take vacations, they're in training, they have sick days. So that factor is used to determine how many folks are needed to fill a position or a post inside the institution. Yours that you're using right now is 1.4. We continue to use that factor. You're also spending a fair amount of money on overtime in your budgets. We assumed that with that 1.4 shift relief factor, that overtime would continue. I don't know what level that would be going forward, but we didn't change those two variables. So with those two variables is where we arrived at 29 additional correctional deputies at full build-out. Community Corrections, which is the division that will handle pretrial services, a big bump in staff compared to where they are right now. Why is that? They're the engine behind that central intake and assessment process. They're working 24/7. They're interviewing everybody. There's a supervision component where they're maintaining community liaisons with those folks that have been released. There's a big effort on that part for those folks to evaluate the mental health stability of everybody, the substance abuse stability level of everybody, to place them appropriately. They aren't doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week now. So there's a significant increase in those individuals as compared to the percentage increase at the Sheriff's Department. You can't do one without the other, in my opinion. It has to be a collective partnership to implement both of those recommendations at the same time. In our report, there was a series of other recommendations. Again, we prioritized it. There's a couple closing comments that I want to make before I turn it back over to the sheriff about the master plan that's been developed. It is intended to be a tool and resource for the county. I recognize, as well as the rest of my team recognize, that not everybody is going to agree with everything that is in that report, agree with how we've prioritized the recommendations, agree with some of the data that has been stipulated in the report. There's always room for conversation and discussion as you go forward. What we would hope happens is that it doesn't sit on a shelf, that the county embraces it, that you continue with a committee that's been in place to actively evaluate the recommendations that have been made in the report, and that you continue this process. Criminal justice system planning, jail planning, capacity forecasting is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process that is the responsibility and obligation of the county, not the consultants who come in. We've done our work. We're here to be a resource as it goes forward, but we hope that you embrace it and go forward. And we've prioritized our recommendations to focus on those things that we saw as most critical at this time, and that get you the biggest impact on jail management. Sheriff?
Thank you, Jim. Really now we're looking at what's our next steps. You know, where do we go from here? And again, this is a presentation that we hope would educate our new commissioners as to what has been going on. Our goal is to develop the most safe and effective jail to manage public risk and supervise inmates that are remanded to the care and custody of the sheriff's office. So our next plans, I am looking to move forward with going out to get a schematic design. It's some of the things that you saw here. We need to determine hard costs. And once we get a good handle on those hard costs, I will return to this board looking for approval and support of what we're going to be presenting. And also when we return to this board, we're going to have to look and find, identify funding sources to move forward with this project. So with that, I think we'll take questions.
Thank you, Sheriff. Chair Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Tony. Thank you. So speaking of identified funding sources, I look at this central intake portion of this similarly to what I would look at the dispatch center, where, I mean, it was kind of a build it and they will come type of a situation. Have we had preliminary discussions with the police departments in the community about this? What are you getting a feel on as far as participation and?
Sure. Again, I tried to stay out of it because of my relationships with the chiefs, and Jim did speak to all of the chiefs here in Macomb County. But with my relationships and networking, 15 years ago, this would never have been talked about. Each agency wanted to keep their own lockup, keep their own personnel. I know that there's 3 agencies that, again, as Jim said, hey, as soon as you can take my prisoners, let's get them out of here because they're an issue. They're a liability for us. Again, Jim indicated that there are some departments that are open to look and see if this would be feasible. Right. And then, again, I think there might be just one department that really isn't interested in it. And again, I think if once it's opened up and we are having this process, I think it's, again, one of those things, build it and they will come. Actually, I had a conversation with Judge Doug Shepard. He's the chief of the district courts. And again, they're looking at some changes in the system about attorneys being present at arraignments. And again, he read the article and talked a little bit to me today about this central intake. It really would help the criminal justice system and would help the courts and move the process along. So I think we're going to get some support from the judges. And again, I'm not going to force any agency or any community, to participate in this. But again, this is the right direction to go. This is the way we should be looking to go into the future.
And the assumption would be obviously similar to the dispatch center, that we would look to cover our costs, obviously, with the additional manpower required, that a lot of these departments would save money by not having to house the prisoners and therefore pay some at least cost to help cover our costs.
Again, I don't want to say that we're going to do this and then it's going to be a cost for it. Obviously, we are the county and it's part of our responsibility, but it's something that we could work with or look at.
And then the last question, I'm not sure if it's for you or for the study itself, but we talked, Commissioner Carabelli's brought it up a million times about centralizing services, and I just was, we were here the other day and we hear of Martha Teaberry redoing their kitchen, and then we look at this and there's a new kitchen 100 yards away that's, that we're going to redo. So just wondering if any of these conversations were had before or planned to be had after, to look at the possibility of, not having 2 full-service, large-scale kitchens in the same complex, so to speak, that are both going to be very expensive, obviously.
Obviously, it's something that we can always look at, and logistically, can it be done? Obviously, in our system, we use inmate labor that's down in the kitchen that's helping us prepare the trays and washing the trays and
that's
roll
just
them up.
That's just one of the things I'm looking at,
right,
as far as.
Obviously, you've seen in this report there's a lot of recommendations. Again, over 11 recommendations, and there's a lot that I have no control over. Again, I have no control over who comes to jail. But again, these are good recommendations, and I think we should always keep an open mind as to what we can do to better service, the residents here in Macomb County at all levels.
Great. I can see a lot more questions coming up in the future, but right now I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sheriff. And thank you, everyone, for the report. Good information. For the rest of the commissioners, this is one responsibility by law. We have to provide for the jail. By law, we have to do this. It's not an option. Let's just not do it. This is something we have to do. With that said, I got a little heartburn with the kitchen, the money we just did over there and redid it.
Of course.
3 years ago. I get it. Part of getting it all right. I asked, though, if someone can forward to the office, I have this little printout here of the slides that they had, and I'd like to get the full, I can't read this, even with my glasses.
We can, we'll ship it to you. We'll get it to the board.
If you could,
Yeah.
because I wanted to take a look out and get a good grasp on the architectural layout that they had. It looked like they were taking some stuff completely away.
Again, that was really just conceptual, and again, the next step, if we're looking for support and that you guys believe in this concept that we've just pitched to you and the 2 key issues, and again, then we'll get to work on some hard costs and if it can work.
And Madam Chair, it's a lot to digest. Obviously, I'd like to take time to digest it, get the other plans, and maybe even stop by and talk some more about it.
Always.
I'm concerned, again, older infrastructure that's currently there, and some from the 50s, and we add on, and eventually there's going to be issues if that isn't addressed. And I just want to have a good grasp of how they're thinking in their process so I can understand it.
Stop by anytime.
Okay. And Commissioner Chair Smith had brought up a couple of things. Again, cooperation with other opportunities within the county ourselves, as far as the kitchen, and then also he touched on other communities as far as intake. When we talked about your central intake of having community corrections do that, do they do that? They don't do that physically now, do they, as your employees?
We are doing, I guess that we call it a pilot type program. We're doing it with 4 courts. 4 courts that actually we have control over. One is Shelby Township, City of the 41B District Court, and the 2 county courts. Our deputy sheriffs are working in those jurisdictions, and we're arresting those individuals, so they are in custody in the Macomb County Jail, where when community correction comes in the morning, they're able to find out who's in custody, and they're able to go interview them and provide the judges with recommendations for bond.
Okay, so then currently they're in the morning assisting, you're in the process of intake.
And again, it's
As a pilot, I get it. We're talking about switching that over. And then that, again, I got to get my head around and get a good understanding of that. I like the idea, but I also like to get a little bit further. I'd like to get into looking at this is that get a lot of federal dollars coming in here. And a lot of other programs that we're spending money on for psych evals and different things that we're doing that's covered by some of these programs that we're doing outside of the jail. And if these positions can be funded, and we've talked about this before at community corrections, you know, with addiction and all the stuff that all the different programs do, but yet we're doing it here in our own jail, and we're paying it out of the general fund where these are dollars that are coming from the federal government, dictated can only be spent on that. Again, I think we need to get really outside of the box, or no box, and just say, okay, these funds can be used in the community corrections and the intake because of the type of screening that they're doing. These are the things I really got to get around and get an understanding of, and I appreciate all the hard work. I know we've talked from, 8 years about this, and obviously we all know something has to happen over there. I just, whatever we do, slow and steady to make sure we're doing it the right way.
I'm all for that.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Leonetti?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sheriff, good to see you. Madam Chair, could Mr. Robertson come up? Sure. I have some questions for him. Mr. Robertson, the report was excellent, and I appreciate when I was reading this report the other couple days here, I'm glad that you highlighted the 2 most important things you think that are necessary in order to prevent what I think, because the end result you're trying to prevent is what would be a major capital requirement. Mm-hmm. And the major capital requirement would be the 2,457 beds.
Correct.
In other words, if we didn't do the central intake system, we would be forced to spend a lot of money almost developing a whole nother jail, in a sense, to house the beds that we would need.
When you look at that high projection scenario, the answer is yes, that would be the case. What's important to recognize is that there is no zero cost option. You're going to spend money one way or the other, whether it's maintaining existing infrastructure, adding a smaller capital project and improving it, but also improving policy and practices which helps you better manage the jail population.
And I appreciate that. I know we're not going to get this as a free ride. I want to focus then on the data part of it. The data part of it is the central intake program. In any of your analysis, is it an absolute requirement that an arrested person would have to be physically present with the staff that's screening them for pretrial purposes? And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about so you maybe understand the question. Somebody's arrested in Warren, okay? It's possible that arrested person could be on a video system to a person at our central intake system, and the data that person at central intake gets could come across the video screen and even through internet or whatever with certain things, that it wouldn't require the transportation element that we were talking about. It might not even require as big of a central intake system, because from what I gathered from the report was we need to physically bring all these people in we're picking up every night to a big central database here at the facility, at the jail, is it possible that we could do something remotely? In any of your analysis, did you find that that may be a feasible option that gives us the data we need? Because I think the central intake system is absolutely important. Pretrial services, absolutely integral. The question is, can it be done remotely, or is it required to be physically there?
Let me try and answer it this way. It's FaceTiming with the grandkids. 10 years ago, unheard of. Nowadays, I have a 7-year-old granddaughter that not only knows the passcode to her mother's iPad, but knows how to call us up and chat with us. So can technology achieve that process part of it? I think there's an absolute opportunity to evaluate that. There's something about a face-to-face, in-person interview, body language, other dynamics that go into play. But it doesn't mean that it has to be for every person that's coming in. So it's part of that implementation strategy. What to me is the more important thing is to recognize that we're going to do it on everybody. It's a centralized process. One staff is collecting all that information. We're evaluating it. We're providing it to other folks. And maybe that staff is, the majority of them are here in a central location, but maybe there's some others that are in some of the bigger jurisdictions to help with that workload. And maybe in some cases, we can do it remotely. It's no different than, oh my gosh, it's no different than in 1975 when I was working in Montgomery County, Maryland, as a part of inmate classification. We had a bond commissioner system there, and you used to have to physically take the paperwork next door to the bonding office. Well, this thing called a fax machine got developed, and we started faxing things, and so the staff didn't have to physically take that piece of paperwork over there. Holy cow, but were there skeptics that said, oh, I don't know what that rolled up, curled piece of paper means, or I don't trust it, or somebody has to authorize it or validate it. Well, we've worked through that now to where that is no longer, well, I don't even know who uses fax machines much anymore, if at all.
Yeah, right.
But that technology has evolved, and so the very long-winded answer to the question is yes.
Okay, and would you think from our standpoint in spending money, we've got a debate between what I think is important data, which goes along to what you were just talking about, versus capital expenditures to build on the facility or add to the facility. Should we be spending our money on trying to find efficient and effective ways for data collection? Or is it going to have to be a hybrid of both? Or where will we focus? My point, I think, is data collection is important. I think you would agree. So we should be looking to maybe spend money and find feasible ways of collecting that data and then looking at capital outlays as a secondary, or are we going to have to mix and blend?
I firmly think that these two recommendations, that there has to be a major part of both of them that are evaluated and implemented now. The capital side is the next step is schematic design to get a better cost estimate. The processing part of it is going to evolve. It's not going to be exactly as we see it now. But I can't imagine if we're really trying to make some significant improvements that we don't do two of those together. It may be a little bit more of data and less of capital, but I don't think it's an either or.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the study. It was very informative, and I appreciate the answers to my questions.
Thanks for reading it over the weekend. It would probably cause for a good nap.
It's better than some of the stuff I read in law school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Drollet.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for being here today. And Mr. Robertson, a couple quick questions on your excellent report. I appreciate the work and time that went into putting this together. Just a couple of quick questions on anticipating the future bed needs. That's got to be one of the hardest parts of putting this together. I know you put together a range.
Yep.
It's hard to anticipate what the effect of a prolonged economic decline would do with potential crime and so forth. However, it comes as a surprise to a lot of folks, including myself at one point, to note that violent crime has been on the decline nationally since the 1990s, a reasonably significant decline. And I was hoping we'd get some sort of dividend off of that, and that there wouldn't be as much need for bed space as otherwise would be. Obviously, your projections took into account Do they continue to project that decline in violent crime that the nation has been experiencing, or how did you incorporate that into your projections?
The challenge with arrest rates is that in many cases there's not a significant correlation between that arrest rate for violent crimes. If there's a reduction in reported violent crimes and the folks who come to jail. Many of your population are pretrial offenders of a misdemeanor or a lower charge level. We took into account as much historical data as we could. We went back to 2010 and we began to project off of that. The challenge was that the data prior to 2010 was harder to get and wasn't as good as from 2010 on. Typically, we would like to have as many years back as we are going forward, and you would see other trends. The other dynamic is that your facility is almost always operating at capacity. And so it's hard to get a good handle on the average daily population because you're having bed management issues and you're having, what's it called, a overcrowding, a crowding dilemma where you're having to make releases. So we took into account as much of that information as we could. Jail capacity forecasting is in no way an exact science. It is intended to be a benchmark for going forward. The key to that is to have a group of policymakers in place that is evaluating that, identifying opportunities to better management, and to build a capacity that you are comfortable with. We're not recommending building to the high capacity. We are recommending building to, quite honestly, a very low capacity going out to 2040. That's 23 years from now, with a increase of maybe 30% in beds, if that. I don't know what that number is.
Okay, that was more complicated than I had hoped, but I'm sure the whole topic is. The follow-up question on that is, and again, this is difficult to project, but according to the report, 43% of the defendants booked in the jail are on narcotics as their most serious charge. We don't know what's going to happen with the, for example, legalized marijuana ballot proposal that's maybe on the ballot in 2018. And this maybe for the sheriff, but of those 43%, do you have any idea what percentage are essentially marijuana, what percentage are harder drugs? It's probably a sheriff question.
I don't know, but I come from a state with legalized marijuana, so.
We're rolling down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that it's a higher percentage of opiate-based individuals that are incarcerated. I would find it very hard if somebody with a possession of a couple marijuana cigarettes are going to be incarcerated at our jail if that's their only offense.
So that it's a low percent of that 43%. That
Exactly. The higher percents are really the issues that we're having are opiate-based products, your heroin, prescription pills, crack cocaine, and those type of individuals.
Okay. Well, thank you. I realize how difficult it is to project, not knowing what the economy is going to like, knowing what laws are going to change. But, it's a little surprising that we only have good data going back to 2010. I mean, it would seem that I would have expected good data to go back farther than that.
Let me try and be as clear as I can with this issue around data. We had tremendous involvement of county staff in pulling the data out of the system, and the data was in a variety of different databases, how it was collected, how it was analyzed, and it was a more difficult process than we were anticipating starting the project. That was one of the reasons why it took a little bit longer. You had data going back further. We felt that the best data for us to use for this evaluation was from 2010 on. One of the recommendations in the report is to develop a better system for data collection analysis. Pretrial services is going to be a key part of that, but you've got a pretty fragmented database system with the way the county's organized. You're improving, that's the good news, but that's an expensive ticket to make those improvements, and it's hard to do. I mean, it is not easy. But it's got to be a data-driven decision-making to better manage the criminal justice system.
Well, thank you both very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Lucido?
Hi, and thank you again for your report. I'm usually the one giving homework. This was a doozy. I know we're focusing in.
We get
on-
paid by the page.
You do, okay.
Yes.
I know we're focusing in on two major things that we'd like to see done. But one of the things that surprised me in the report was that there's a need for 24/7 medical and mental health, and that right now we only have coverage 12 hours. I'd like to see a projection. In the report, it says that.
I can't remember the exact coverage, but I know that our recommendation was as a part of the central intake and assessment process, that those specialized professionals that are there to support pretrial services be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
There is 24/7 coverage with RNs and LPNs.
Okay,
in the
but from
facility.
Correct Care Solutions?
Exactly, and
They're
then
only
a
there
doctor
12?
that will come in during the day to see the inmates.
Okay.
Mental health staff is there usually days and afternoons to assess, but it's
Okay,
not
that-
24/7.
But
there
there's
are
coverage.
RNs and LPNs that are in the facility.
Okay,
at all times.
that was my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Kleinfeld?
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the opiates, do those tend to be felonies as opposed to misdemeanors, or are they misdemeanors?
But yeah, I think primary,
Yeah, if it's the possession, it's gonna rise to the felony level. If we're
Okay.
charging use, it would be more of a misdemeanor.
Okay, so I realize we're focusing on two things that we can do, but I do want to just touch on a couple of other things. Commissioner Drillette mentioned the 43%, but in the previous paragraph it says 35% of persons booked into the jail on a misdemeanor were charged with public order offense, like nuisance alcohol-related offenses and things like that. And 64% of misdemeanor sentences in district court were sent to jail, as opposed to, being sentenced to go out and pick up trash and pay fines and that sort of thing. So it seems like there are, maybe out of the sheriff's jurisdiction, but there are some things that there could be an immediate discussion of change that would have a significant impact on the amount of people coming into the jail out in the district courts. It seemed like a good deal of this report had to do with the sentencing taking place at district court. Would you agree with that?
yes, with a caveat that I go back to your earlier point that having conversations about the other recommendations in this report as you go forward and looking at ways to make some system improvements is going to be important. Those are things that are outside of the sheriff's control, but certainly warrant a conversation with a group of individuals.
So is that the reason that you're focusing on these two, is that several of the other things maybe fall outside of the county's jurisdiction?
No, our reason for focusing on those two is those that we saw could have the greatest impact long-term with managing jail population, as well as having the right bed to manage the inmates while they're in custody.
Okay, so with regard to the centralized intake facility, or even some of the other recommendations in here, I don't know which of these recommendations can be handled by decisions made by the county versus decisions that have to be made in the district courts, or even possibly decisions that have to be made at the state level, either the state court administrator's office or through legislation. So I don't know that if we could universally decide, okay, intakes are going to take place here. Do we have that authority, or does that authority, who does the authority fall within for some of these decisions?
You know, for the intake and the centralized intake, if the police department wants to bring the prisoners to the jail, and we have the room, we have the capacity, they can bring them.
So in that case, it falls with the local police department?
Exactly.
Okay, so several of these findings and recommendations are going to fall within jurisdictions that are not us. So that there's going to have to be a larger discussion, both at the state level and countywide with the judges, specifically with the sentencing, the money issue. We know that that's a big problem, and what I was a little surprised at in reading this report is we've been having a lot of discussions up here about finding ways to not have nonviolent offenders in our system, and the statistics show that for all the discussion that we've had and that has been had at the state and national level, none of that's actually bearing out in what's happening in Macomb County right now. Would you agree that that's sort of true or maybe true?
I can't comment on the conversations that have been occurring up here. Those weren't part of our study. We're reflecting on who we saw in custody, what the profile of those offenders look like, and opportunities to better manage them in the future. But the point to focus on is that having a group, whether it's this body, another body, a combination of something else that takes the master plan and implements pieces of it as you go forward is going to be paramount to success and to involve those stakeholders who are involved in that decision making.
Okay,
and I think, if I could just jump on that real quick. And again, I think if you're looking at, who's coming to jail and if it's for this, a narcotics-related offense, and again, I'm not going to speak for the judges, but I've got to believe that maybe a first-time offender that goes in front of a judge isn't going to end up in the county jail. So you have to look at maybe sometimes this might be the second or third time that this individual is in front of a judge, and a judge has no other option but to put him incarcerated. So.
Okay, and just two more, if I may. You have in here regarding our antiquated jail facility that our facility lacks program space, space for recreation, and space for programs for inmates while they're in our custody. But unless I missed it, I didn't see that actually being addressed in the changes that are being proposed.
Those would certainly be addressed as you go forward into schematic design. When we put together our documents to determine the number of staff, we put together what's called a space program to look at the spaces that are needed going forward. We've called out for extensive programming areas and extensive recreation areas. You're not seeing them at that level of detail, but they will be provided as you go to schematic design.
Okay, and then this was not one of your top two, the establishment of a central arraignment court for felony cases. Would you explain where you have the arraignment, felony cases would be immediately directed to a central arraignment court operated by the court of general jurisdiction? And then later you suggested the possibility of district courts becoming part of the unified court system with the circuit court, or another approach is to consolidate the many district courts into one or two district courts. So is that are you suggesting, when you say central arraignment operated by the court of general jurisdiction, first would you define for those of us who aren't attorneys what the court of general jurisdiction is?
That's the court that is hearing the early pleas and hearing the cases.
Hearing the before the arraignment. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's what takes place now.
What you have now is a system where you have arraignments occurring in various district courts.
Yes.
The primary focus of that recommendation is to figure out a way to centralize that process so that it's more consistent and better able to be managed instead of having different policies and practices for arraignments in the various jurisdictions.
Okay, so when you say operated by the court of general jurisdiction, what you're saying is that we change the definition of what the court of general jurisdiction is.
It's an issue where this one's harder to do than probably any of the others because it involves the state and getting some policies and practices changed there.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I thought, those two conflicted with each other, and I think what you're indicating is, well, we got to change what general jurisdiction is, and here are two possible scenarios of that. Okay, and then the last one is with regard to the hold resolution process. Is that something that we can change very quickly?
Yeah, that is in many cases a staffing issue where you have adequate staff that are focusing just on resolving those holds. And it may be contacting other jurisdictions, and the Sheriff's Office is doing some of that now, but trying to get resolution to those sooner as opposed to later, either to have the hold removed so something can happen for the Macomb County inmate, or resolving what's occurring in Macomb County so they can go to the jurisdiction that has a hold placed on them.
All right, and I'll relinquish. I know other people are waiting. I might have a couple more, but I'll relinquish. Thank you.
Commissioner Myjack?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody, for coming here today, providing us this report. My questions are more based on just the capital side and stuff like that. And Sheriff Wickersham, you've heard suggestions from this board and comments, especially from Commissioner Carabelli, about all the costs that we have been incurring at the jail for maintaining the old infrastructure and things like that. And I'm just curious, will you have that in sort of the final report? How much will we save if some project like this were to be implemented, in a nutshell?
Obviously, we're going to have additional, or not additional, but we're going to have ongoing costs, maintenance costs. As most of you know, over the last 3 years, we've had, I think, a $12 million project of refurbishing the tower, the HVAC systems at the facility.
Right.
So we're spending money to keep the facility open. And additional cost and maintenance, we should be able to hopefully get some type of projection, but it would also be a projection. And again, with what we might come back with the hard cost versus what it might cost, it's something that we'd have to look at.
Okay, thank you. And next question is the initial Macomb County jail construction, what was that, back in the 50s, around there?
1954.
1954.
68,
Okay.
76.
Right. So all of those projects, the initial jail and all the additions over the years, how was that funded? I'm trying to remember. I mean, I don't think I could recall any special millages or bonding for those. That came through capital projects, didn't it?
Back then, I don't.
Okay. But for something like this, I'm looking at your last page here, recommended next steps, project funding, cost, certainly cost, and millage, bond proposal. Projects like this that occur in other parts of the county across the nation, how are they funded? Any one of you, if you can answer that.
You've seen more.
Yeah, I would say that I've been seeing a combination of sales tax initiatives.
Sales tax,
yeah,
but that's by the state government.
Yeah, well, I've seen counties do a sales tax. It's gone to the voters, but it may be a quarter cent, a half cent, a 3/16, whatever sales tax for it. A special millage as a public safety fund with a dedicated funding stream that goes just to capital as well as operational cost. And I've seen public vote on a bonding issue to spend X amount of dollars over X period of time.
So it's safe to assume that that your recommended next step, whatever might be a millage or bond proposal, would be a vote by the people. The people would have to vote this up or down.
Well, really,
right?
my next step is going to be to come up with a schematic design.
Okay.
And come up with hard
So I'm getting too far ahead.
Yeah, come up with hard cost, and we, as Macomb County, have to come up with what's the best solution and how we could implement this project. But that's a little ways away.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Romano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some general statements. Sheriff, Mr. Robertson, thank you. Excellent report. Just some general statements and then a question for Sheriff Wickersham. I'm sure we're all aware, as the population of Macomb County grows, so does the population of the criminals grow. I spent a year in the probation department in Sterling Heights, and the rate of recidivism was shocking. for the criminals coming back, and they have to go someplace. So resident safety, as we all know, is paramount for all of us. Our commissioners, just as the sheriff and the police department, oath is to protect and serve. We as commissioners have that same obligation. And on the other hand, we have an obligation to spend their money wisely. I agree completely with Commissioner Carabelli, and this is, as far as I'm concerned, 1,700 beds is not enough. I'd rather have empty beds and more of them than less beds, and we're going to find out how we're going to spend the money to take care of these people. So I think baby steps are very appropriate. I'm in complete agreement with this schematic design to get it, moving it forward, and the sooner the better. People are concerned out there. They're concerned about their safety. I realize that, as Commissioner Drollet said, violent crimes are down unless it happens to you personally. And then for someone to have to go to a police department or a sheriff's department to report a crime, it's tantamount to them. It's the first time it's ever happened. It's shocking to them. So the better service that we can give them in keeping criminals off the street, regardless of what they're doing, I'm sure that would be better for all residents involved. The question that I have for Sheriff Wickersham, if I may, right now Sterling Heights privatizes their jail system. So that everybody's aware of what's going on. They no longer maintain their jail system. In fact, as I said, they privatize it out. So unless it could be extremely, well, I shouldn't say even extremely, as long as it could be cost savings for them to go to the central location, which incidentally I think is a tremendous idea, great idea. That is something that, have you approached them at all, I guess is the question I'm asking. Have you gone to that step yet?
To privatize the Macomb County Jail?
No.
Oh, I thought maybe that's where you're going. I'm going.
No.
Oh, where are we going, Commissioner?
Sterling Heights right now privatized.
Yes.
Would they be have they seen any?
We were involved, obviously, we're doing the dispatching now, and you were on the council there, and when you made that decision to go, we were talking to Chief Reese, and he was looking at other options also, and that's, what they decided, and it's working well for them.
So they would probably consider the central location. In fact, they'd probably embrace it because it's that much less that they'd have to be concerned about.
Again, I didn't want to get in when they were talking because I didn't want to, not induce, but sway any of my friends. Sterling Heights, do you remember what they said? They have the privatized lockup.
Mr.
If you
Robertson.
can recall, it's been a year or so since these meetings.
There was only one jurisdiction that was leaning more towards the no, we wouldn't participate side. Every other and Sterling Heights wasn't that jurisdiction. Every other jurisdiction either said 100% we're behind it, or we have some issues that we need to work through, but if we can resolve those issues, transportation, can we do it by technology, they supported the process.
Very good. That's the only question I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sauger.
I've been listening to this wheel going. I'm full support of it. But I heard you say that you talked to all these police chiefs and they were all supporting it. I think it's better that you get a hold of maybe Jim Jacobs at the college and invite all these supervisors, mayors of the communities, because that's where you're going to get the support from. The chiefs will, yeah, but where does the money come from? So I would advise you to go that route, because if you just ask police chiefs, yeah, they're great people. Yeah, we'll do anything. We'll say yes.
Most of them.
Well, except those up north. But anyway, that's what my suggestion would be. And right now we got a situation where you want to give each community, say down the road, they got to contribute so much towards this. The bigger communities, such as Warren and Sterling Heights, would have to support more according to this plan, and that's where you get the bump in the road at what level. And I know that's a long way down the road. I know it's coming, but I would suggest you getting a hold of the mayor's supervisors at the college somewhere, talk to them about this whole scenario, and then you see how the support grows. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? I have a question regarding the mental health recommendations. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Couple of things that we saw regarding mental health. Number one, jails have become, over the years, one of the primary places for housing folks with mental health issues. Your jail's not uncommon with that. Our primary focus for the mental health issues was to provide the appropriate assessment of those individuals, to allow for them to be housed in the most appropriate space, whether it's in custody or out, and to have a plan in place for better managing their behavior, either at the arrest side or at a diversion side. The worst thing you can do from a mental health perspective is to incarcerate someone without appropriate services and or treatment, and to incarcerate them in an institution that environmentally is not conducive to good positive behavior. So the capital side of it is trying to fix that, and the pretrial services and mental health assessment side is trying to focus on the front end of that.
And can you speak to where we stand on that right now?
From a capital side, you're currently using the current space inside the facility. Barb, I'm going to have to ask you to talk about pretrial services and some of the mental health stuff that you're doing at this point. Yeah, I knew she'd come up.
Currently, most of the mental health program.
Barb, can you just introduce yourself real quick,
I'm
please?
sorry, Barbara Kasky, Director of Community Corrections in Macomb County.
Thank you.
And I'm also going to lower that, and hopefully you guys can see me. Currently, most of the program that we do is really part of post-sentencing programming because we don't have the staffing to be able to provide the interventions that we need to as far as at the pretrial level. So currently, we can make referrals to community mental health. We can work with some of the providers that we're working with in our dual diagnosis program, but in order to be able to provide it on a level that we should be for everyone coming in, we would need much more staff than that.
Okay. I note that the report recommends that we restore a position in the jail on community mental health.
Oh, I think you're probably talking about the community mental health jail diversion program.
I'm not certain. That's what my question is what is this speaking to? It says, in any case, the county should consider restoring the community mental health in jail position to full-time.
Yeah, it's actually gone, and I can't speak exactly on the numbers because I'm not from community mental health, but it's a program that had been staffed by, I think, 3 or 4 individuals in the past, and currently it's at a 0.5 FTE, and that's really to work with those individuals who are community mental health clients in the community, and then they're identified very quickly once they're booked into the jail, and then they work with them to get them out into the community. Obviously, there are lots of them. And for a 0.5 FTE to handle that is difficult.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Carabelli, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Sheriff, I'd be remiss if I didn't step back for the other commissioners and mention that I think when I was first elected, before you came sheriff, and then shortly after, there was a declaration of emergency a few times in the overcrowding that had to take place. And through the cooperation of the sheriff's office, and I believe maybe the prosecutor, definitely the judges, and how they've worked together as far as the sentencing that another commissioner brought up earlier, they have worked together to avert serious issues that could be going on right now if they hadn't done that. And I wanted to give my kudos out to both the judges and the sheriff's office for doing what you did to keep the Band-Aid on as going forward. And I wanted to make sure everybody was well aware of how many times have we seen that there was a declaration of emergency for overcrowding.
Yeah, 2016, we didn't have to declare one, so that was the first time.
And that's a positive thing. Yep. You know, and I'll say 2 quick things in closing. You know, the sheriff's job is to determine and manage the jail. He's bringing this study that was authorized by the Board of Commissioners in his budget to find out what we need to do. He's doing his job coming forward. As far as paying for it, that's not the sheriff's job. That's going to be this body's job and then the county executive to work together with him and how that goes about. He has nothing to do with that and how it happens. The last thing I want to touch on is everything goes full circle. Times got bad, everybody wanted to cut something. They wanted to cut the DARE programs to telling the kids to stay off the drugs. But after talking to the judges that came up here a couple years ago, 80% of everybody that's in jail is drug or alcohol related, either from the use, possession, or stealing, or killing, or whatever it is. And yet, we wanted to cut their money, not educate the kids. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, on the second round. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 questions for 3 different individuals. Sheriff, I'm going to save yours for last.
Okay.
If I could have Miss Barb, if you could come back up. No.
Yeah, thanks.
The question I have for you, in this study, it's, again, we're going to go back to the data part of it. It's absolutely integral from what we see here in this study to have that important data for central intake. And as you indicated, most of your stuff is post-judgment, post-sentencing.
Most of our programming
Most of your
now,
programming
yes.
is. How much staff would you need to have to increase your staff in order to accommodate a central intake system so that we could get the pretrial services effective?
Where it's going.
Yeah.
The number that Jim presented, which I believe was 19 additional.
Okay, then that's what I was in.
FTE.
Okay.
Right now, we currently have 3.5.
Okay.
So those, we're doing about 10% of the bookings that come into the jail per week. So it's a hefty increase.
Okay, because one of my commissioners here was confused. He thought those were those additional employees were what I would call latchkey guys. They weren't necessarily latchkey. They're the data portion of it.
For the community corrections, I wouldn't look at it in terms of data. It's more in terms of screening and risk assessment.
Absolutely.
And then certainly compiling that data to be used, for determining their risk level and things of that nature.
Okay.
Sorry.
Next question is for Mr. Robertson again, if I could. Mr. Robertson, the third item on your list was to establish a public defender's office. I always look at the top 3. We talked about the first 2. Tell us a little bit about the third portion here. Why do you feel that that's an important element in this process?
What we found in the study is that there is a disparity between the amount of monies and staff and the process for prosecution as well as defense. We recognize that there is a need for indigent defense. The recommendation focuses on consolidating that and making it an official office with dedicated staff to get more consistent quality of service. The downside to that recommendation is that your current process of using contract attorneys, which benefits on a different level, goes away, and so it's almost not a chicken and an egg, but it's very hard to put that into perspective because you have a loss on this other side, which is fairly dramatic. For me, the important thing is to, whether it's a dedicated office for the public defender or improving that process, that's what really the recommendation is focused on, is enhancing that process to some degree so that you have indigent defense early on in the process as a part of pretrial services.
You would agree then having a defense attorney present at the arraignment, which would be part of the intake process, is absolutely essential. Yep. And you feel, because I can tell you now, the way it is now, the attorney isn't even appointed until after the arraignment process. So there is nobody standing there for that defendant to advocate that defendant's position to help in the assessment of the arraignment and ultimately whether we put them in jail or whether we send them out on bond. So
the more we can do earlier in the process, earlier in the decision-making process, allows us to make better informed decisions as early as possible and manage that jail capacity as well as the risk of the individual.
Okay, thank you. And the last question for Sheriff Wickersham. I'm sorry. Sheriff, you're going to come back to us with schematics, and that's great. Just so you get an idea where I'm coming from, I buy everything on Amazon. I don't go to the mall anymore. I don't believe in brick and mortar as much anymore. And when I was asking the questions to Mr. Robertson, I was wondering how can we utilize data? And if the more data we can receive, which I think is the most important part of it, then the less we can build in brick and mortar. Because I think he began his study by saying if we don't implement a central intake system and have this data we're going to have more brick and mortar. And it's not that we might not need more brick and mortar, but I think it's cheaper to get data than it is to have to build brick and mortar or do things like move a kitchen and have certain commissioners have heart attacks. The thing is, when you come back with your schematics, and I'm looking forward to them, are you going to have something in there about the central intake? That's what I really want to see, is I want to see the data part of what you're coming at us with and how much that's going to cost first, because I think that may be important, because based on how we do with the data collection, then we can make a decision on what you need for brick and mortar. Would you agree with that?
I would partially agree with that. One of the challenges, and it was brought up with Commissioner Kleinfeld, was the fact that, you know, we deal with many district courts, and there's 3 different systems, software systems that those courts use. And again, that was probably one of the major hurdles of this whole project, was the fact that how do we get this data? And Commissioner Gillette asked, why did we only go back to 2010? I mean, we have our jail data, but it doesn't capture everybody that's arrested, because individuals arrested in Warren may bond out and may never hit the Macomb County Jail. So you really don't have a clear view of what's going on. But yeah, data, you know, with technology is again, this is a great blueprint. Again, we have this ability now to see who's in our jail, how long they're staying, where they're coming from, where they're sentenced, and that's a tool that we're going to be able to use into the future. And I do.
Yeah, and again, I guess I'm asking a sort of I want to work with we all want to work with this. As Commissioner Carabelli said, we have an obligation to support you here. The only thing I'm asking is that you bring us some schematics on the data portion of it, on what we're looking at for the intake, whether it be part of it's brick and mortar or part of it's the way we're going to use it, the technology we're going to use. I want to see those numbers.
It'll be done right.
All right.
You only get one shot at this.
All right. Thank you,
Because
Sheriff.
I will leave, if there's no other questions, with one final comment.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I
Thank
thought.
you.
That's all right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, with respect to the 11 recommendations, what I'd really like to see is actually point by point. This recommendation can be done solely by the county. This recommendation takes the stakeholders of the district court judges. This one may take the state court administrators, point by point, so we know exactly what we're dealing with respect to the 11. So that's something I'd like to see in the future. So then my couple other questions aren't for you, unfortunately. The first one is you did write a lot about public defenders, and thank you, Commissioner Leonetti, for bringing it up. You talked about the lack of parity between the prosecutor's office and defenders. You talked about the possibility of a department. You also talked about in your 11 recommendations, if there's not going to be a public defender's office, you suggested that there be significant amount of money poured into the public defenders. So that's one. And then the second one was you talked about building a community correction center to help people leave jail and then integrate into the community. Both of those go directly to the overcrowding one because it hopefully to help with recidivism, and the other one because, as you indicated, most of these individuals are actually pleading to the original offense as opposed to getting any kind of plea bargain. So given all of that, I'm going to ask you what might be an uncomfortable question, but my question is, you gave us 2 top recommendations and you talked at great length on those 2 and didn't really touch on the others. Did you derive your top 2 recommendations based solely on your findings and your beliefs, or did you also take into account the feelings and opinions of stakeholders, other administrators involved when you came up with the top 2? And I ask that because I know at least one part of your finding we've already seen in the newspaper there was a disagreement with. Different people have different philosophies, and I just want to make sure you're giving us these top 2 recommendations well, you know what the question is were they related to how other people felt or solely based on your findings?
Was I objective is the question.
Well, yes.
No need to dance around the issue. I chose those 2 based on what I saw as the ones that could be implemented that would have the biggest impact at this phase. If I could say implement them all, that would be the comprehensive approach. That's why there's 11 or 12 recommendations, not just 2. My experience has been that if central intake and assessment, and Macomb would be on the cutting edge of doing that. No one else that I have worked with has gotten all the way into that process. If you could implement that and pretrial services and then pause and see how things go, that you may get the biggest bang for your buck at that point. Is indigent defense an issue? Absolutely. Are some of the other things that have been talked about? Absolutely. But I feel that it's important for the county to take those other recommendations and say, let's prioritize those on our own based on what we think is going to be important. But I chose those 2, and it was my choice. I chose those 2. Now, I won't dance around it. Other folks were in agreement with that. Obviously, the sheriff's office was, or I wouldn't be here. But those were the ones that I came to them with and said, here's how I would prioritize it. And let's see what those do first. Your deficient beds is a major issue. You are going to continue to spend money on those buildings over there, regardless of what happens with any of these recommendations. But the central intake process gets you further along to better managing your jail population and your offenders. And it's not just about capacity, it's about doing the right thing for that offender, and the pretrial services component really enhances that.
Okay, and then my last question is a copy of this being sent to every city manager, every police department, every district court judge, as well as the state court administrator's office?
All of the key stakeholders were sent a copy. Again, I'd have to double check if each one of those individuals, again, all the police chiefs received a copy, judges, or at least the chiefs of the district court and the circuit court, was all distributed.
Okay, and I think I would agree with Commissioner Sager that some of the decision makers are the elected bodies in those communities, and so I don't know how to achieve it, but we need to make sure that it's in the hands of the elected bodies as well.
And again, knowing the police chiefs, I'm 100% positive they didn't come to these meetings without informing their boss, whether it's their mayor, their city manager, on what was going on in the processes and the discussions. I mean, it just wasn't a one-time meeting. It was a multi-time meeting. So, again.
One does not necessarily equate to the other, but I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The study references that there is an increased number of females in the Macomb County Jail, and then it references national numbers. Is Macomb County higher than the national average on females incarcerated in the jail?
Boy, at 68, the memory doesn't function the way it should all the time. I can't quote the what the national number is. I know that Macomb was increasing, and the trend across the country has been to increase. Pardon me. You are not the highest that I've seen. I have seen jurisdictions that 50% of their jail population is female offenders, so that has increased. I think Macomb, I'd have to get back. I had some water someplace. I'd have to get back to you on that. So, oh, here it is. I can't remember what that number was in the national part. It used to be very few, and now I think it's somewhere between 10 and 15% on a national average.
Okay, and then my other question was that you recommend the adoption of the Michigan Indigent Defense Standards, which is a new standard. Can you tell us how far off we are now from that, or where we're lacking on that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't quote that right now in terms of where you are in terms of off of that. I'd have to get back to you.
Can you tell us where we should focus on with regard to those new standards?
What I was recommending is or what the other members of the team were, is that you have indigent defense counsel at every phase of the process, and so you have that representation early on, and specifically at arraignment.
Okay, so you think that the focus needs to be on representation at arraignment?
Arraignment and as early in the process as when plea agreements are reached.
Did you look at all the fees that defense counsel is paid and where we are
No.
is compared to others? Okay. And then where did you see the biggest parity between defense counsel and prosecution? Is it in resources? Is it, because that's noted in the study as an issue.
I think that's primarily based on the number of staff and how, what availability they have to meet with their clients earlier in the process. Not office space or anything like that.
Okay, so what is your, I'm trying to get a sense of what your recommendation is with regards to that, with defense counsel for indigents.
The primary part of that recommendation was to have that representation early in the process, specifically at arraignment or as early as possible, so that you can have that representation then.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other speakers on the list. Are there any other questions? Sheriff, did you want to make a final statement?
Again, until we come back, or I come back with, in front of you on what direction we would like to go in, I just would like to kind of give you a little historical perspective. Commissioner Sauger was present in 2005. Commissioner Duget and Commissioner Brown aren't here. They were the other two that were present, so they must have heard this speech before. In 2005, we did this exact same study in a direction. This one's a little bit more in depth. At that time, we still have the old information. Presented to the Board of Commissioners in 2005 was 296 new special needs housing beds, new intake assessment center, new food service, laundry, bulk storage, relocate medical clinic, renovate old intake and jail support, consolidate records area, central control, new central plant. Again, this was done back in 2005, and now 12 years we're back in front of you talking about the same thing. And I would just ask that until I come back, you think about this, because I don't want to leave it for the next sheriff to be here in 2029 asking the same thing. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Sheriff, I have one question. Sorry.
Well, time was up.
You gave us something else to think about here. It sounds to me like we just spent a lot of money to get the same answers we just got 12 years ago. Is there anything else in that study that we can avoid duplicating based on the fact that we've got almost the same answers?
The 2005 study was more brick, mortar. Let's increase our capacity, because again, in 2001, 2002, we had all 1,438 beds open, and we were running at about a 1,500 average daily population. I mean, I think between 2001 and 2004, I think we had at least a dozen emergency overcrowding where we had to release inmates. So again, that was the factor that brought forth the 2005 study of we need a new system and where to go.
Was that the extent of the study, or was there more done? Was there schematics drawn and things like that? I think I remember seeing there was some schematics drawn at the point.
There was schematics done, and it was a full presentation. Okay. I think the only thing different between the 2005 study and this 2012 is this one really reached out farther into the criminal justice system, and hence you see 11 different recommendations.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions at all? Is there a motion to receive and file? Moved by Sauger, supported by Carabelli. Please vote on your tablet. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is new business. Is there any new business for the committee? Seeing none, we'll close new business and move to public participation. Any members of the public wish to address the committee?
I can't help it, Madam Chair. I'd just like to make a comment based on the presentation. There's no doubt about it in my experience, as well as in the state. The state nationally is also a leader in terms of decreasing the population.
We are all concerned about public safety, number one. There's no question about that. Secondly, we're all concerned about cost savings and the most efficient use of taxpayer dollars for the benefit of the public and public safety. The presentation about implementing a central intake and referral system is clearly on point. As we know, in the state of Michigan, the budget is the greatest for corrections of $2.2 billion a year we're spending on corrections for the state of Michigan. It's also appropriate for the county of Macomb, when possible, to increase public safety and reduce taxpayer cost. In doing so, the whole concept of community corrections, pretrial services, and central intake and referral system is right on point. It's something that I teach my students. We have practicums. We do a variety of things. I've worked in conjunction when fellow Judge John Fikens was alive, and that was one of his concerns with a women's facility, is how we can increase public safety insofar as women and decrease costs, not only in terms of the women's facilities, but the state facilities within the state of Michigan. What you heard today, and I haven't discussed this with any of the participants prior to this, I haven't been involved in the whole process, but I can only speak to you in terms of, from personal experience of over 40 years in corrections and criminal justice, and having survived the Attica riot and a variety of other experiences I've had. I can tell you that this is right on point in terms of implementing a central intake and referral system to address the needs of substance abuse offenders, as well as people who are mentally ill, who create a large proportion of the jail population. And if we're spending $75, $80 a day per person, if we can find alternatives to incarceration through community services and pretrial services, you're right on point. Sorry, but I had to say it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the Board of Commissioners. My name is Tanya Grillo. I am the Regional Manager for Macomb, Lapeer, Oakland County, and St. Clair for the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. So a couple of you chair officers had brought up the MIDC. So I was here, I learned of the meeting late yesterday afternoon, so I wanted to be able to provide some information to you, and there were some questions that were specifically asked of Barb Caskey from Pretrial Services regarding some numbers. Chairwoman Kleinfeld asked some numbers about the prosecutor's office, and I have that information. I'd like to be able to provide it. I've reached out to you in previous emails starting back on April 17th. I continue to ask for conversation and have conversation regarding the MIDC, specifically because the Act does make you, as the funding unit, responsible for the Michigan Indigent Defense System here in Macomb County. The prosecutor's office has 88 members. There's one prosecutor is elected. There are 5 chief officers. There are 45 prosecuting attorneys, APAs. There are 5 investigators, and there's 32 members of their clerical staff as of today. Regarding the questions that you were asking about specific numbers for community corrections and the funding source for the centralized intake system, the interesting thing is Oakland County already has a pretrial services system. There are 14 courts in Oakland County. Inside each court, there is a member of their pretrial staff at that court, providing the information exactly as Barb Caskey was talking about and what this report proposes to give. These district court judges and circuit court judges are given information right at the onset of these cases. It's an amazing service that's been offered in Oakland County for several years, and their staff, again, is one in each courtroom, or one in each courthouse, and there are 14 total courts in Oakland County. Macomb County has 10 total courts. And so I've had the pleasure of working with Barb Caskey. Before I took this position at the MIDC, I was a solo practitioner in Macomb County. I was on every single court-appointed list. So I have a very unique position in what I do, because I actually was here in Macomb County taking appointed cases. So I know how the system works. I know where there could be vast amounts of improvement, and I'm here as a resource to the commission to assist in that as we move forward. The 4 standards that Ms. Toko was talking about regarding the counsel at first appearance, that's standard number 4. And that was what we're talking about with this centralized intake system. It would be vital, and it would make the system run so much smoother. Right now, you only have counsel at first appearance when that's a retained attorney who knows of the date of the arrest. Moving forward, the standard does propose and would mandate that all court cases, every single arraignment, there is a counsel member present for arraignment purposes. A centralized intake would make that much easier to facilitate. But there are other options that are available to courts if that system doesn't come through. Regarding the question for staff, that had to do with the staff, and the PD office is what's mentioned and recommended in the report. It doesn't have to be necessarily a full office. It doesn't necessarily have to be on parity to the prosecutor's office. The nice thing is there have been system models of reform that were sent to you via email. I invite you to look at that email. 2 of them were sent, one on the April 17th and another one on April 28th, after the second set of standards were sent out for public comment. That standard, the system model reform option is also where you would have a scaled down public defender office with a very much viable defense bar. In Macomb County, there are 352 members on the court-appointed list at a felony level. That is the largest list in a very large mile radius. Macomb County has a very unique position in the court-appointed list systems. Wayne County has a blended system with LADA, which is a state standard. It's by statute that they have 25% of the cases, and there's a historical reason for that. Oakland County has a similar assigned counsel list. So it's nice that I can see how the changes could work and also what the different options are available. So I invite you to look through those documents. I'll be reaching out to you again in the future to hopefully schedule something so that I can appear here as well and present to you. But I wanted to let you know that there is information out there. My contact information is available, and I would love to sit down and talk to anybody who'd like to. So thank you so much for your time.
Any other members of the public wish to address the committee? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Romano, supported by Commissioner Lucido. Please cast your final vote on your tablet. Thank you. For the members of the audience, if you didn't get a copy of the jail study and you would like a copy, we have a couple of extra copies up here.